I'm Chris Furse, Chief Client Officer of VMLY&R New York, and I'm joined today by Chris Davis, Chief Marketing Officer, New Balance. Chris and I are going to make a small pivot in today's discussion about AI and influencer marketing and talk about another form of innovation, and that's brand transformation, and how that kind of innovation can lead to game-changing approaches in marketing, how we shop, how we capture attention, and ultimately how we interact with consumers for refined consumer experiences. So Chris, thanks for being here, and let's get right to it. So you've been New Balance CMO for 5 years now. Can you take us back to when the day you accepted that role and what was in your mind and what did you want to accomplish at that time?
Sure. So first of all, I will say that VMLY&R has been the longest standing AOR in the history of our 117-year-old brand. So very much appreciate the partnership and the innovation and strategy that the team brings. And secondly, to answer your question, so about 7 or 8 years ago, I accepted our head of marketing position. And if you think about New Balance at that point in time, we were really just a great product company. We were a product company that everybody trusted. We made shoes that were distributed all over the world. But the only feeling about New Balance was tangible, meaning these shoes are comfortable, they're lightweight, this shirt is moisture wicking. We really wanted to change the perception of New Balance from a great global products company to a world-class athletic brand that evoked emotion, that the feeling was more sentimental and aspirational and inspirational versus tangible. So when we really went on this journey, it was about transforming a great 115-year-old product company to a world-class athletic brand, to be a 115-year-old company that was focused on tomorrow and really embed ourselves in a culture of calculated risk excellence in order to attain new consumer groups around the world and really grow with brand accretive commercial revenue.
Yeah, that's great, and you've done an amazing job. So the theme today is around innovation, and we talked about that from influencer marketing to AI, but we talk about it in terms of brand transformation. So what does the idea of innovation mean to you?
So for us, when we look at it from a brand standpoint, innovation is more of it's a mindset, it's a philosophy, it's a North Star. I think oftentimes marketers and organizations and brands confuse innovation with marketing technology. And of course, marketing technology is important to stay on the forefront of trend, to stay on the forefront of what's available to connect with consumers. However, from our standpoint, innovation is more about a philosophy and a mindset. And we really look at two major truths to serve as the catalyst for our innovative mindset. The first one is that the death of all major brands in sports, in retail, in fashion lies in the notion of stagnation. And what that ultimately means, if you're standing still, you're moving backwards. If you don't have the courage to disrupt yourself, or if you don't have the courage to disrupt your industry, you will ultimately be disrupted. The second major truth that we live by is that growth and comfort are two concepts that can never coexist. So as a brand, as an individual, as a marketing department, you constantly have to be putting yourself in uncomfortable positions in order to attain that level of growth. So I guess you could say in our perception, in our mindset, like the idea of innovation is directly correlated to calculated risk excellence. And when we first began this mission about 7 or 8 years ago, we kept trying to encourage individuals to take risk. And people are inherently risk averse. So we then had to figure out how we were going to operationalize risk taking in order to ensure that risk taking was something that was uniformly replicable throughout the entirety of our organization, not only within the marketing department. So Chris, as you know, we developed an investment model to ensure that our risk taking was uniform, that it was replicable, that it was operationally efficient, but also that individuals were held accountable to taking risk and driving innovation. So 50% of our budget is allocated towards proven tactics. That could be out of home, that could be paid media in the upper or lower funnel. It was just basically anything that we know that's going to be table stakes to invest in for our budget. 30% was going to be calculated risk. That could be something that's working in another industry that our industry has not yet adopted. And then 20% was going to be experimental with a high probability of failure. So once something worked in the 20% bucket, it would then move into the 30% bucket. If it worked 2 or 3 more times in the 30% bucket, it then moved into the 50% bucket. So as a result, with our demand creation spend, we had this like self-fulfilling prophecy of innovation.
Yeah, that's great. And if you're standing still, you're moving backwards, which is such an interesting phrase and concept and something you talk about all the time. And I think organizationally, like what are the kinds of challenges that you faced when you started like conveying that mantra and you're talking about really innovative things that you're doing from a marketing department? Surely there were challenges that were faced along the way.
Yes, and I would say the major challenge is like this idea of reticence. Because if you're constantly pushing, people are going to hesitate. Not necessarily the individuals on your team, but that could be cross-department partnerships, whether that be in finance, whether that be in legal. And by the way, the legal and finance team, like I'm constantly in the principal's office because if you're trying to push the boundaries on things that have never been done before, the KPIs aren't necessarily going to directly align with your CFO's KPIs. And the legal department is navigating this like sea of ambiguity of things that don't have precedent because you're trying to consistently push the status quo. So I think that's, if you're getting in trouble with legal and finance consistently, I think that's a good thing. But to answer your question, like the idea of hesitation and the idea of reticence is where we probably faced the most pushback. But I think it's important to note that you can be hyper aggressive, but also calculated. You can take risk, but also be considered with the risk that you're taking. And having that dichotomy is absolutely essential. And from an organization standpoint, over the course of the last 8 years, we've entered basketball, we've entered world football. We have our American football launch today here in Kansas City at the NFL draft. We have made a major push into women's sports with the 2 biggest female athletes in the world in Coco Gauff and Sydney McLaughlin. So, you can be very calculated about how you're pushing the status quo, about how you're innovating, how you're growing. But it's important to make yourself feel uncomfortable because if you're not making yourself feel uncomfortable, there's 0% chance that your brand is going to build that foundational growth that everybody's striving to attain.
I love the idea of making yourself uncomfortable through that. So along with that, so that's part of the journey you're on. And so, but you've got, talk to me a little bit about positioning, marketing positioning and messaging that's kind of resonating with consumers today. The brand has so much, you're beyond a moment of heat. Like the brand is just an incredible place today. So talk to me a little bit about evolution of messaging.
I think that evolution of messaging is critical, particularly today in the marketing and branding landscape. I would say that the ideas of branding and marketing today have never been further apart, even branding and advertising as well. So in order for us to really communicate our authentic brand message, we always strive to be transparent and take an autobiographical approach with consumers, with all of our demand creation, with all of our content, with all of our communications. And what an autobiographical approach means is we use every opportunity in our marketing, in our branding, to communicate who we are to consumers, to introduce ourselves, to reintroduce ourselves. This could be from a value standpoint. It could be on a serious topic, or it can just be conveying our personality of wit, being whimsical, lighthearted, and not taking ourselves too seriously. From a branding standpoint, it's all about transparency. It's about ensuring that all of our marketing is a reflection of our values as a brand, and using every piece of content as an opportunity to introduce ourselves to new consumers, but reintroduce ourselves to existing consumers. And if we use that premise that marketing is a reflection of your values as a brand, you're really building a foundation of authenticity that you can continue to build upon and make every piece of content, every action, every activation accretive to the previous, so that you're having this ongoing dialogue that's building off of your previous dialogue versus having these big one-off moments that are happening in isolated instances throughout the course of time.
Okay, that's great. And talk a little bit about some of the specific strategies or things that you've done. Think about brand transformation and innovation around that. So many of the things that you've done are super unique. Darius comes to mind and how you handled that in the early days. But talk to me a little bit some of those.
It goes back to our early days with VML, now VMLY&R, but our brand North Star is fiercely independent since 1906. So that is the filter by which we judge everything, not only from a marketing standpoint, but also from a product and overall brand standpoint. So knowing that we are a fiercely independent brand that was originated in 1906, so basically a 117-year-old startup company that's focused on tomorrow, a brand with heritage versus a heritage brand. So a brand with heritage versus a heritage brand. We're a brand that's focused on innovation. And being fiercely independent, it ensures that all of our entries into new categories and ensures that all of our entries into new markets are disruptive. And I'm not trying to use disruptive as an overused term or a sexy term, but like we truly strive to be disruptive. And I'll give an example. Today, we are announcing our formal entry into American football, and we are the first brand to enter the American football landscape collaboratively. So we're working with Clutch Sports Group and New Balance on creating a collaborative footwear and apparel line called Clutch Athletics. We are signing athletes. We're doing pop-ups. We have content on a Clutch Athletics by New Balance collection that is our formal entry into the NFL, NIL, and American football landscape. So whenever we try to do something, we try to do it considered. We try to make sure that our partners are a reflection of our values, but we also try to make sure it's something that's never been done before. Chris mentioned Darius. Our announcement into basketball and the NBA was by signing a high school basketball player who decided not to participate in college basketball and jumped straight to the NBA draft. But during the period in which his high school graduation ended and he was preparing for the NBA draft, he was an intern at New Balance. So that's just one example. And Darius, helped with basketball social media, basketball product, helped inform our line. And today, he's an NBA player for the Phoenix Suns and going into the second round of the playoffs.
Yeah, incredible. So such a great transformation story, such great innovative approaches. Like, how do you balance, the brand heritage and legacy while still kind of evolving and adapting to consumer needs today and your point of view on marketing?
So in terms of balancing heritage with innovation or your past with your future, I firmly believe that in order to know where you're going, you need to know where you're from and who you are. So there has to be an equilibrium in terms of your authentic heritage and your aspirational future. And that's where the idea of being a brand with heritage versus a heritage brand really comes in. But at the end of the day, the values of your former self and the values of your future self should be the same value stream. However, how you communicate those values to new generations of consumers has to evolve because people digest content today differently than they did in the 1980s, different than the early 2000s. In 2030, they're going to be digesting it differently then. So how you communicate your authentic, true being in a transparent manner to new consumers in a relevant way is absolutely pivotal. And I think that's where the 50-30-20 model comes in. That's where the marketing as a reflection of your values comes in. But also, it's knowing who you are, understanding who you are, honoring your past, paying homage to your past, but also knowing where you want to go in the future and being laser focused on how you're communicating your future self to consumers. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think just thinking about that and just thinking about the journey that you've been on in that transformation journey, like what advice would you give to marketers out there who are considering similar things for their brands or their companies?
I would say first and foremost, separate branding from marketing and advertising. If you're trying to create or endure or evolve into a brand transformation, it's absolutely pivotal that you don't just grasp onto whatever contemporary cultural trend exists and then insert your brand into a trend that's occurring into the marketplace. You have to reveal your brand truth, understand who you are, and build that foundational authenticity of of taking that autobiographical approach and explaining to consumers what your brand values are, who you are, what you represent, what your product differentiation is, and really embed that in a true and honest way. If you're just taking a marketing approach and not necessarily building the foundation of your brand, I think you'll quickly find yourself in a hamster wheel of chasing trend and not necessarily being true to who you are. So reveal your brand truth versus market to your consumers. Build that foundation of authenticity in branding versus jumping straight to advertising, because you have to know who you are. If you don't know who you are, your voice is going to be ambiguous to consumers and your messaging isn't going to be clear. So be comfortable with who you are, embrace the elephant in the room, ensure that like everything that you're doing is honest. And if you and your team are able to communicate the authentic, true brand that you're representing in a modern and relevant way, that's the best way to connect with consumers, not just jumping on any cultural tension or contemporary relevant trend, because then you'll find yourself in a hamster wheel.
Yeah, that's great. Well, great advice. And CD, thank you for your time today and everything.
Thanks for having me.
You got it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.